great. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that this finds everybody safe after Hurricane Helene. Our thoughts are with everyone right now. We've personally seen the devastation ourselves and just been thinking of everyone. We wanted to try to have this webinar today to answer some of the questions that we've been getting and hearing and seeing on social media and all kinds of places to try to help people kind of through this process. And then some that were not able to join us today, we're asking that we forward this to them afterwards as well. So we're going to try to touch on some of that stuff. But first, we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Allison Freeman. I'm an attorney at Constable Law, and I've been doing property insurance for a long time. James, I don't even know how long at this point, how long we've been. What year are we? I forget.
Oh, 08, 2008.
Jeez. Okay. So we've been through quite a few hurricanes. This one probably was the most impactful where we live, to be perfectly honest. But yes, so we've been through this for quite some time. And then Jason Ciafalo, who's on this as well, and will introduce himself, we've been working with for almost that entire time as well. So whichever one of you wants to go next.
Sure, I'll hop in. James Constable. I'm an attorney, and I started with Allison at an insurance defense practice back in 2008. We were representing insurance companies at that time, dealing with hurricane claims in the state of Florida. And we did that together for about 5 years. And then in late 2012, we both switched sides at the same time. And instead of representing insurance companies and hurricane claims, and flood claims, we started representing policyholders. And so over the course of the last 12, 13 years, we've represented literally thousands of homeowners, commercial building owners, hotel groups, restaurant groups, condominium associations, et cetera, with storm claims and flood claims. This type of loss has been 100% of our practice. And we built what I think is a really great team over the years to help represent policyholders with these types of claims. And with that, I'll flip that over to Jason, since he's our flood guru. Jason's muted.
Sorry, Jason, you got it?
Yeah, thank you.
No
I'm
problem.
Jason Ciafalo. I've worked very closely with James and Allie for as long as I can remember. I've been doing the hurricane stuff since Katrina in Mississippi, and I've done stuff with Hurricane Ike in Texas. I started doing the flood work with Hurricane Ike actually back in 2010. And the necessity of having adequate representation on those. And I've done a lot of stuff with Sandy stuff in New Jersey. Of course, Irma, Ian, you can name the storms. I've been involved in some way with them. And I'm very pleased to work with you guys. And I know I feel horrible for all the storm victims. I've been fielding a lot of calls, and my heart goes out to everyone impacted by this storm, and anything we can do to make a difference. That's what our goal is today and beyond.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. I live out by Clearwater Beach. I've got friends in, Bel Air, Indian Rocks, out by Carlowell. And so, really this storm has been in my backyard, quite literally. And so, of course, we're all receiving a lot of phone calls, and I think putting this Zoom together will hopefully be helpful so we can kind of consolidate the information we're distributing on an individual level, and hopefully use this Zoom to be able to share information with others. And so, I think it's important to understand, kind of preliminarily, what's the difference between flood insurance versus wind insurance? Because a lot of folks in our beachfront communities have a flood policy, and they also have a homeowner's insurance or a wind policy. And so, just to, kind of put it simply, your flood policy pays for rising waters. Okay. We had this storm surge that came, up into our homes through, door jams and gaps in the house, allowed water to come into our house. All that rising water is going to fall under the flood insurance policy. Okay. And the flood insurance policy, which most of these are policies that are under the FEMA or the National Flood Insurance Program, have certain coverages and have certain limitations. And each policy might have a different amount that it insures the building and a different amount that it provides coverage for personal property or contents. Separate from that, we have our homeowners insurance policies, and that provides coverage for wind or wind created openings to the building. And I look at that more or less as water that comes into the home, not as rising water, because that's flood, but water that comes through the roof, water that comes through the ceilings, water that comes through the top of the window jams that's above that flood line, water that might come in through soffits or other openings in the building, chimneys, skylights, for example, that would fall under our homeowner's insurance or our wind policy, and of course be subject to the hurricane deductible. And so in almost all of these cases from Hurricane Helene, where we had significant flooding, we also had significant wind, the suggestion is to report claims, to put both carriers, flood and homeowners insurance, on notice of a loss, schedule inspections with the adjusters under each of those policies. So there's a difference between what's going to be covered under flood and what's going to be covered under wind. And so this hurricane really is necessitating claims with each of those carriers. Now that we're a couple of days out from the storm, there's a practical reality, which is the adjusters for the wind carriers and the adjusters for the flood carriers are not yet making it out to the properties. In some instances they've been out, but in a lot of instances they've not yet been out. And so the question then becomes, well, what do I do? I've got the salt water in my house. How do I proceed with mitigating the loss? And so there's this duty under the policy to provide access and to make damaged property available for inspection. But then we've also got under these policies a duty to mitigate the loss, a duty to make repairs such that the damage doesn't get worse. And so I'll let Allison maybe hop in and talk about a little bit about steps you can take to document the loss, to make sure that before the mitigation work is done, before the flooring's removed, drywall removed, baseboards, et cetera, how do I make sure I can prove to the flood adjuster or the wind adjuster what damage existed in my home? Because that's really an important step.
Well, first I would say, even if you are not sure about filing, file right away. Don't delay at all, because like James said, it's taking them time to get out there, and they put you in line from when they come in. And so the longer that you wait, the longer it takes for you to be on their list, the longer they're asking you, just wait, and you need to start mitigating. So that being said, make sure it's filed. I was telling people there's been some issues with internet and things like that. So keep, if you can, like a screenshot of it or something showing that you contacted them, you sent it in, because if they say, oh, our system didn't get it or whatever, I know a couple of them were down over the weekend. So I think they're better now, hopefully, but just in case, that way you're showing you did send it to them and then these things started. But even if you've already sent it or you have not filed it, it's okay. With regards to, we were just talking with Jason, documentation is key for this stuff, especially flood, wind, any of this stuff. It is your job to prove what happened, like what damages you have. So you may think taking a photograph of everything is too many. It's not. Like, there's never enough photographs. There is never enough documentation. Even we tell people take a picture of the room and then zoom in on things. So that way you can remember where this room was and that kind of stuff, especially from content standpoint. You'll know where certain contents were, where that couch was, all that kind of stuff. Because you'll think you'll remember, but it's crazy how you quickly forget things, and it's hard to repeat where things were and what floor they were on and all that kind of stuff for when you're trying to make all those contents claims. And so don't feel like you're taking too many photographs. You can't take enough. And then also, I was discussing with someone, so send those photographs. I know some people don't have access to computers right now or ways to back those up, but then send them to someone or do something with them. Because when you delete them from your iPhone, a lot of times they only stay in your deleted for 30 days, or some systems, depending on what carrier you have, will only keep it in the cloud for a certain period of time. So then when people need those photographs again, they're shocked to find out that they're gone. So just remember to take the photographs and then back them up. And with regards to contents, so a lot of people are hauling all these contents out of their property right now, and they're throwing them out on the street. And I had heard from someone, and I can't take credit for this tip, but I'm going to tell everyone from now on to take a photograph of if there's a serial number on the fridge or underneath your couch, if it says, what kind of couch it is, because it is really hard to remember where you got couches from, what kind of refrigerator you had. And if those things are gone, it's hard to say, oh, did I have Frigidaire or did I have, a Whirlpool? Like, you will just be able to look back at those photographs and Google it, and it will tell you what kind you had and how much it costs. So when you're creating contents lists, you can put all those details in your contents list, and the more details you have on contents, the more likely the insurance company is to pay for those damages. So it really just helps you to document all that stuff for contents. Jason, do you have anything to add since I know you?
I'll say one thing, Ali. When you said that, the word I always the thing I always tell people I've worked with over the years with the storms is a photograph may be worth thousands of dollars, not 1,000 words. You know, they say the old idiot. Because when you come back later and try to recreate whatever was impacted by the storm and it's not there anymore, the photographs can help in many ways with the adjusters and with the higher ups in the insurance company from either flood or wind. So I think that's always such a great thing to bring up when you're talking about taking pictures and not being shy about doing so.
Right, and another documentation area. So a lot of these cases are gonna have damages to the building and the property, but also contents, like I just mentioned, and then additional living expenses. And so keeping track of, if you're paying for Airbnb, paying for a hotel room, all that kind of stuff. I know some people were using cash because ATM machines were not working, that kind of stuff. Just try to keep documentation of that so that you can seek those additional living expenses also, depending on what the policy is. I don't, it depends on what your coverages are, but just try to keep track of all that stuff the best you can. I know you're going through lots of stuff right now, but just anything that you're spending on this storm, just keep track of it and try to have some documentation.
Yeah, and so once you've made it through the process of photographing everything, taking videos as best you can to document the condition of the stuff that's wet, the tendency is, we're seeing big trash piles out in front of all these houses, and that's because we got to get the wet stuff out so it doesn't start growing mold. Do a good job of photographing, videoing, taking note of where certain items are, documenting the fact that they're wet by being able to show the flood line. I look at it like if I can show where the flood line was in each of the rooms, I'm helping the flood adjuster out because he can use those photos, he or she can use those photos to recreate what the flood line was in that room. If I've got photos showing where the contents were in that room, there's a real easy determination. And look, a lot of these houses, we got, 3, 4, 5 foot of flood. It's easy to be able to establish where the flood line is. With the flood lines that are a little lower, maybe the only one on the baseboards, it's a little more difficult to decipher. So just do the best you can to document it what we got. We've all got smartphones these days, which definitely makes things helpful. And once you've documented that stuff and the wet contents are being removed, at that point, I really feel like we're in a position where we can start the emergency services, demolition and mitigation. And what I mean by that and what, kind of the common practice is, if it's carpet, if it's wood flooring or laminate flooring that got wet, it's going to be removed. If there's baseboards, those are going to be removed. And then drywall's not all of the drywall's not coming out, but drywall's coming up. Some and Jason can provide some feedback with respect to the FEMA specifications, but we've got to remove the drywall where it got wet and remove the drywall slightly above where it got wet to make sure that we're getting all the bad materials out. And a lot of folks have asked, do I need to wait for the adjuster to come out before I get this wet baseboard and wet drywall out? My suggestion is no, you got a duty to mitigate the damage. And this salt water is like throwing, fuel on a fire in terms of mold. And so the quicker you can get these wet materials out, the better. And so, Jason, can you just touch on for just a quick minute what your feedback or advice would be relative to how high to remove the drywall? Because I've heard this question come up pretty regularly is, do I go up 3 feet? Do I go up 4 feet? Do I go up 2 feet? How do you make that determination and what is that based on?
That's based on the actual flood line itself. How far did the flood line go into the house? If it's 6 inches versus 4 feet, obviously that's going to determine. And then you'll see how far up it wicks. Because if you've gone a few days without any AC and if no one's gone in there to be able to dry it out, there's going to be stuff that comes up. So that's going to depend on the property, the flood line, and the level of flood and the degree of it, and the circumstances of the property. The flood adjusters will understand that and they'll calculate for that. I always tell clients I work with on a flood case, do what you can to mitigate, like you just said, James and Ali, but then also allow them to come in, let them do what they need to do for their assessment because they're trained to scope the loss. And so when they come in and they scope the loss, let them do that. And at some point, you'll be able to have your own set of eyes and ears on that to look at it as a backup, but they have to do their job first. So let them come in and do that while we're obviously doing the muck out, the tear out, and preventing things from getting worse. But documentation is key on that if you video it. And the other thing I'd bring up too, any vendors that come in, get all their information. Make sure that they aren't fly-by-nights. Get them because they're going to be pivotal later in proving the claim on the flood claim, for example, or on your homeowner's claim. So if you have third parties doing the like a Servpro type thing or something, make sure you have all that well documented as much as possible. Receipts, invoices, line item breakdown of work performed, all that stuff, because the flood program will need line item breakdown, detailed estimates or invoices from any third party that comes and does work that you're trying to get reimbursed on.
Sure, sure. So if we're just to recap kind of chronologically, call your wind carrier, call your flood carrier, document the loss with photos and videos, get the drywall, get the baseboards, get the wet flooring, and I'm talking about wood, I'm talking about carpet, out of the home, the wet contents out of the home after they've been documented. And at that point, typically what we're seeing are dehumidifiers and fans running to try to dry these properties out, okay? And then once those dehumidifiers are running, once those fans are running, we start getting rid of the moisture, we start preventing the ability to have mold growing in these spaces, okay? And then from there, then we've got the adjusters coming out and doing their inspections. Of course, if the adjuster comes early, great, but I just haven't seen a lot of that happening. And so what we're not doing is putting these homes back together, okay? What we're suggesting is, you know, once the property is being dried out, you can't start putting your kitchen back together. You can't start putting drywall back up and getting this thing move-in ready, because we need to give the flood adjusters and the wind adjusters an opportunity to see the damaged property. And we got to make sure that we're making that available for inspection. So before any reconstruction starts, you got to make sure that the insurance company has an opportunity to come out and do their inspection. In some cases, the insurance company is going to come out over the next week or two and say they need to hire an engineer. That's going to kind of push things a little bit further behind on the timeline, but it's important to make sure that you make that damaged property available for inspection. And if they need a follow-up inspection, which is very likely, that's going to happen. So, you know, it's not an overnight thing that these houses are going to be able to be put back together right away, but that's just kind of chronologically how it follows. Now, that brings me to, you know, kind of an important question I've been asked quite regularly is, okay, well, look, we cut out the drywall, we cut out the baseboard, we've got these fans running, but as part of that, our kitchen cabinets were removed. You know, we no longer have working appliances. We now have to move out. So we just signed a lease. We rented a condo, we rented a house nearby, and now we're incurring these additional expenses. Is this something that's reimbursable? Okay. And this is a critical question, because if you look at your homeowner's insurance policy, your wind insurance policy, typically we've got coverage for additional living expenses or temporary living expenses incurred in the event of a covered loss. But if you look at your flood policy, a typical NFIP flood policy may not have coverage for additional living expenses, okay? Typically it's covering the building. Oftentimes it's covering contents subject to limitations, but not including coverage for additional living expenses. So when you go to your homeowner's insurance policy and you see you've got these coverage limits available for additional living expenses, remember that the question as to whether those additional living expenses are reimbursable under that homeowner's insurance policy is, did a wind-created opening, did the wind from the hurricane cause me to make my home uninhabitable? And the bad news, the unfortunate news for a lot of folks, where the overwhelming reason for having to move out of the house is flood, your homeowner's insurance policy has an exclusion for flood. Okay, so if you've had to move out of your house because of flood damage, it's really tough news, but your homeowner's insurance policy doesn't provide coverage for that, nor does flood insurance. So we understand that there's a need to move out of the house. The houses are uninhabitable, but the flip side of that is just, unfortunately, it's just not covered unless the additional living expenses are incurred because of wind damage. Okay, so if, you know, wind tore off your roof, you know, wind created, you know, punctures in the windows that make it so that you can't live in your house anymore, then there's an argument that it would fall under the homeowner's insurance. But the majority of the stuff that I'm seeing on the beach is we're moving out because of the flood. And so that's not covered. And I know that's not great news to a lot of folks. And so, but what that also does is that highlights the importance of pushing this claims process along as quickly as we can, because the quicker you get your claim called in, the quicker you get your property dried out, the quicker we get these adjuster inspections scheduled, the quicker you can start reconstruction, and that gets you back into the house. And so, you know, part of the goal here is to help set out the chronology, and then, you know, to provide some advice on how we can help expedite this process to help move things along. because the quicker you get into the house, the less you're spending out of pocket on these additional living expenses. And so if I could go back, Jason, I want to point a question to you real quick. I was just talking about the dry out process, and I mentioned the kitchen cabinets and countertops. And that's an important issue because I think a lot of folks could live without baseboards and could live without drywall. Okay. And if we get our power back on, we got air conditioning running, there's an argument that we can stay in the house. But talk to me a little bit about coverage for the kitchen cabinets and the countertops, which kind of becomes, one of the central things we look at in determining whether the house is habitable or not, and making the decision, do I stay or do I go rent somewhere?
I'll say that's a great point, James. First thing I'll say to that is with flood, the way to look at the flood water is, and the way the flood program works is get coverage. You have to show the physical inundation of the water affecting the property with a permanent change in the condition of the property, that it can't just be wiped away like tile or something, right? So when it comes to the cabinets, if the water came in contact with the lower cabinets and caused damage, and you have to take out, for example, the countertop to get those cabinets in and out, there's a good possibility that if you can't salvage the countertop, you can show that as potential coverage by the flood by showing the connection there. Ripping one out affected the other. When it comes to the upper cabinets and that kind of thing, I know with the flood program, this has been something that's evolved over time. And so what I would tell anybody who's dealing with a claim like this is make sure you document everything. Be prepared to seek having everything reimbursed by the flood program, but they may put up some arguments to say that the upper cabinets aren't connected to the lower, the inundation. The way they look at it is causally when they scope the loss. Okay, the flood water came in contact with this in the kitchen, that'll be covered because the flood water changed it permanently. But the upper cabinets, oh, those may not be covered. And that's where we have to potentially might need a lawyer or someone to put up that argument to show the parameters of the flood program, the physical inundation of the water, causally linked the lower cabinets, and everything is interconnected. You got to show that causally. So that's one thing to keep in mind when it comes to flood or any type of thing with this. The other thing I would say too is when you're dealing with the muck out and the tear out, making sure that you can show the condition of the property before you tear it out. A lot of people think in their minds, oh, I took pictures last week. Continuously take pictures. If you have a smartphone, take pictures all the time. Because if you're showing that, if you have one photo that shows that the flood line was so high in one room, it might be, because the elevation might change, the base flood elevation of the structure. You may be able to get extra coverage in that area just by showing those photos to the adjuster. And if you were in the house at the time of the loss, you can then testify, provide evidence, etc. So the other thing I would say too is make sure you're doing your own little journal. Make sure you're documenting whatever it is you're seeing now, because that'll come in handy later when you have to make factual arguments to the flood adjuster, or potentially if we have to go legal with it later with any lawyer you represent. So those things kind of all coincide. But the big thing is making sure you show the flood water and the flood line and how it affected your contents and your structural, your house at the property being. And so that's one thing with the actual cabinets, is showing that connection with the floodwaters interceding and causing it. That's how I would approach it at the outset.
All right. And just to go back to one point, I was talking about the dry out, and I said, if it's carpet, the carpet's coming out. If it's wood or it's laminate, it's coming out. And a big question goes back to, well, what if it's tile? Okay. And because if you got tile in your house, the flood water was in there. It's, whether it's salt water or it's, black water that's coming in, we know that those tiles and the slab absorb that water. However, FEMA doesn't look at it that way. And so, Jason, if you could speak to the FEMA guidelines as it relates to tile, because by and large, suggestion from FEMA is not to remove that tile flooring because it's not going to be reimbursed.
With something like that, I always look at, is it functioning the way it's intended to function? So in other words, I've been in houses over the years with flood damage, and the FEMA adjuster is like, no, or the attorneys on FEMA, that's not covered. That's tile. You can wipe it down. Well, if you get an expert in there to look at it, a contractor or an engineer to show that the actual tile got, separated in some way, or it's floated, they call it, where it delaminated, it got separated from the lower, and now even though it's there, but when you knock on it, it's hollow sounding. That's where you can show the functional change in the tile. It's actual physical properties changed by the water and the brackish water and all that inundating it and all that. That's how I would show that. You'd show that the functional basis of the tile, it's not the same anymore. If you show that it's been affected permanently, a physical change from the inundation of the floodwaters, that's how you'll seek to argue for coverage on it.
But I think the key word there by FEMA, flooring that's buckling because it was, inundated with water.
James, I think you're freezing.
Yeah, I think someone froze.
I think James froze.
No worries. I think tying into what James just said, if you have the inundation of the water.
The FEMA adjuster, the flood
Wait a second.
adjuster.
Oops. James?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we lost you for a bit.
All right, sorry.
It's okay. It's freezing.
The joys of Zoom in the middle of power outages and
That's
internet
right.
out.
What we've been talking about, like a few of the things that, I've been trying to remind people is, and along with the documentation, I think with what Jason was saying when he's saying when adjusters come out and making sure you show them, I think when these adjusters come to your property, keep in mind, you want to show them everything. Like you are frustrated, this process is frustrating, you want it to be faster and quicker, but the best way you can help your claim along is by actually working with those people coming to your properties. Like when they're trying to inspect your property, show them everything. I always tell people, don't assume there's not damage in a room because you may not see it because you don't do this all the time, but they do. So let them have access to everything. Show them the stuff, show them the contents if they're in your yard, and work with them. If many people watched the 60 Minutes this week, with Hurricane Ian, those field adjusters did a lot of great work. They walked around, they wrote estimates for everything they saw. It was later that those estimates were changed, but those field adjusters who were in those people's houses looking at stuff, and they said, we talked with them, we showed them all around and all that stuff. So you want to provide all that stuff to the flood adjusters and the wind adjusters if they're out, and anyone that they hire. And along that same line, if someone comes to your property and says they're there for the insurance company, we are already seeing scams. Make sure that the insurance company sent them. Like they should be scheduling this stuff with you. You should know these people are coming, whether it's an engineer, an adjuster, and a mold remediation company, an estimator. You should know. So if someone's showing up on your door and saying, "Hi, I'm here to help you sign this document," or whatever, don't do that. Like, be sure you know who you're talking to. Get a card from them, get their information so you know the person that's in your home is working with the insurance company and you know exactly who they are, because we are already seeing it and they are getting really smart, where they're looking at people's names and saying, "Hey, so and so, I'm here from the insurance company." So be very, very careful about making sure that they are. And then when they are there, as frustrated as you are, just try to be kind and show them what you can, because they do have a job to do. Like I think Jason mentioned that they have a job to do. So help them do that job, and it can help out your claim in the end.
Yeah, and I would just further that the insurance company, when they come out and they do their inspection, if an adjuster's out there, they're not asking you to sign anything. They're there to go look at the property, take photos, and write an estimate. And I've been in my neighbors' houses, I've been in my friends' house over the last couple of days. There's a lot of door-to-door salesmen for these different company business. They say they're there for the insurance company or they work with the insurance company, but the reality is they're a sales rep for a dry out company or a restoration company. If somebody's coming from your insurance company, they're not asking you to sign anything. Okay. And so just read what it is you're being asked to sign and think real hard whether you actually want to sign that document or not. Also realize that if you are signing a document with a contractor, restoration vendor, insurance company, or somebody that you wanted to hire, take a look, because most of these agreements have statutory cancellation provisions in them. And so there may be a chance that you can get out of that contract within the parameters of the cancellation provisions. And if you have any questions about a contract that you've signed or you've been presented with, you can send that to one of us and we'd be happy to take a look at it. And you can send that to contact@constable-law.com. We set up an email address for purposes of sending documentation. So if you have any questions, contact@constable-law.com. If you're not sure whether to sign something or not, shoot it over and I would be happy to take a look. Or you can call our office 727-797-0100 and ask one of our team to take a look at it. And we'd be happy to do that. So when it comes to, the claims process, a lot of folks are kind of trying to figure out what to do next. So I've called in the insurance claim, and then what happens next. And what we're seeing is a lot of the insurance companies and flood adjusting companies are getting, backed up with scheduling because of the influx of claims in our area. And so what I want to do is just kind of talk about what we at Constable Law and Allie and Jason and I, and working together, kind of what we do, because we've all been handling insurance claims. It's been virtually 100% of our practice now since 2000, the mid 2000s, 2008, 9, and I think Jason started even before that. What do we do? And so I can tell you when we get hired, our firm is either calling in a claim, if the claim hasn't been called in, or if a claim has been called in, then we'll send a letter of representation to the insurance company. And it's my feeling, and I know that Allison and Jason would agree as well, that when the insurance company gets a letter from a law firm that says we're now representing this policyholder, we feel like these claims are given a level of priority because the insurance company now knows they're dealing with a law firm that understands how this is supposed to work and is going to hold them accountable to the claims investigation statutes and standards that they should be following. And then from there, the insurance company is going to send an adjuster out. And a lot of these adjusters are great folks. So we are not here to badmouth insurance companies. We are not here to badmouth insurance adjusters. I'm friends with many of them. And there are a lot of insurance companies that are trying to do the right thing. There are a lot of field adjusters that are trying to do the right thing. This isn't a, good guys versus bad guys thing. For me, this is how do we all work together to accomplish the best outcome for the policyholder, whether that's a homeowner, that's a condo association, that's a hotel group. But, along those lines, the insurance company is sending out an adjuster. And it's been my experience that a lot of times those adjusters are looking at coverage or looking at costs from the lens of the insurance company, because that's who's hiring them. And so I think the tendency in many cases, not all, is that these estimates tend to be on the conservative side when it comes to what's covered and what's not covered, and when it comes to pricing. And so part of what we've integrated into our practice, which is similar to like, private adjuster or public adjuster, is, we send out a loss consultant that's looking at it from the lens of the policyholder. And if there's a coverage that's in the gray, by law, the policy is supposed to be interpreted in favor of coverage, in favor of the policyholder. So if it's not clear from the policy if something's covered or not, by law, it's supposed to result in an extension of coverage. And so we're sending loss adjusters out that are looking at it from that lens, from more of a liberal lens, if you will, to come up with a claim valuation that's favorable to the policyholder. And invariably, what we end up with is an estimate from the insurance company over on one end of the pendulum, an estimate from, our side, or paid invoices from contractors on our side, which are higher. And oftentimes those estimates or invoices are right in line with what it should be, or maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. And a lot of times those result in, negotiated claim settlements. And that's what we see. Quite frankly, I look back over the last 2 years, about 80% of our cases have been resolved without litigation. Okay. So that doesn't mean that we're ending up in lawsuits on a lot of these, but we are having to advocate on these. It's the threat of litigation. It's the potential of litigation, having a law firm involved, that I think results in these claims getting settled more favorably, what I would say is more reasonably, in favor of the policyholder. And that's where I think having an advocate is important. And we're here to help, and that's what we're doing. I've personally fielded over 100 phone calls over the last couple of days from friends and neighbors, where we're getting involved in their claims now, and we're going to be advocating for those folks. And so that's how I'm looking at it. And if you want us to look at your claim, or you want to talk to us about it, again, look at that contact@constable-law.com. Send us over your declarations page, give us a brief description of the damage, give us the best phone number we can reach you at. We're going to take a look at that, what you send over, and we'll see how best we might be able to help with your claim process. Another thing I want to just kind of point out briefly is, We're seeing a lot of flood damage. And there's a question of, should I put my wind carrier on notice? And Allison suggested earlier, yes, you should. And I think it's important to note that even though the flood is the more noticeable damage at this point, we also haven't had much rain. We haven't had much rain at all since the storm hit. And the winds from this hurricane in the Pinellas County area were 70, 80 mile an hour. We had some really significant winds that came through the area. And I think there's a lot of damage to roofs that we haven't even seen yet because we haven't had any rain. And over the next week or so, we're going to have a lot of rain. And that's something to pay attention to. And that's also why we're encouraging putting the wind carriers on notice now, even though we don't know if there's roof damage or not. And I'm not one of these guys that's saying every roof has damage after the storm, but it's something to watch for. And if you start seeing ceiling stains and leaks over the next, couple of weeks, the next couple of months, there's a good chance that there is some sort of a nexus between the hurricane winds we just experienced and those rains. So I think that's something important to pay attention to.
I just want to add one thing, James, to what you just said. I think it's great in terms of the wind created openings with property, as you said, could be discovered later. Also, policies I've seen during Hurricane Katrina, people had homeowners policies and they had provisions in there that might get triggered by different coverages that don't err on the side that you may not have coverage just because you can't find a wind created opening. Like you guys are both saying, I agree with you. It's better to treat every policy as a potential claim if you have damage, because there might be something in those policies that are there that we could utilize, or a homeowner or a business owner can utilize to their advantage if there's evidence of such that triggers the coverage.
Yeah. Okay. And so, I've just talked about these different estimates and how, the insurance company estimate might be over here versus, the homeowner's estimates or invoices over here. Talk to me a little bit, Jason, about the deadlines as it relates specifically to flood, because FEMA has some pretty tight deadlines on flood. And I know, it's typical that they get extended, but I think it's also critical to understand at this point that there hasn't been any extension. And so what are those deadlines to get a flood claim submitted? And what's the deadline to appeal the decision if you don't like what flood has said?
Great question, and very important to go over for flood. First off, you have the first critical nexus is submitting a proof of loss for a supplemental flood claim. Once the original claim gets adjusted by the adjuster, by the flood program, once they come out and they scope the loss, if you disagree with their opinion because it's a lowballed assessment of damages, you want to turn in a supplemental proof of loss. The way FEMA works with that is let's say it's 80,000 they paid you, and let's say your claim's worth 220. You turn in the supplemental proof of loss for the 220, the larger amount. And then well, the FEMA deadline with this storm, probably with something like Helene, I'm anticipating normally it's the 60 days you got to deal with, but under extenuating circumstances like this, they'll likely extend it out. Potentially, you got to keep looking, but you want to make sure you have your ducks in a row and get it in within the time frame once the assessment's done by the insurance company. But the 60-day provision is the basic one under a flood claim that will definitely get extended in this circumstance. We don't know how long out that goes, so you want to keep track of the FEMA.gov website to see if they issue any waivers that allow the deadline for submitting supplemental proof of losses to be extended. That's the first part. Once you turn in the supplemental proof of loss and FEMA does their adjustment of it, they'll likely tender you either additional payment or they'll deny the claim. Importantly to note that from the date of your denial letter from FEMA, whoever the adjuster, the insurance company that administers it, from 1 year from the date of that denial letter, you have the ability to file a suit and challenge it in court. You don't get a jury trial, you get a judge bench trial in federal court of the jurisdiction where your property is located. So most of these would probably be the Middle District of Florida, U.S. Middle District, but it's the 1 year from that date that you have to make sure you pay close attention to, because if you go outside that date, it's a death to the claim. And if you don't turn a supplemental proof of loss, that can also be very dangerous to providing your ability to recover against FEMA on a supplemental flood claim.
Okay, so important to understand, just to recap, really is if you get a payment from flood or denial from flood, you've got 60 days to file a supplemental proof of loss, right?
Correct.
Okay, and that's an important deadline to pay attention to. And with wind, while we're encouraging folks to submit claims to your wind carrier now, is you've only got a year to report a claim, which seems like a long time, but it goes quick. It was 4 years up until the legislator shortened that time frame. And we're seeing insurance companies taking the position that even if you report it within that first year, it's late notice if it's been more than a few weeks or a few months, depending on the circumstances. So prompt notice to these insurance companies that there is damage is important. Once you provide a notice of the loss, we've got some time on a wind carrier to actually calculate what the damages are. But notice of the initial loss becomes really important with these wind claims. And then another important question, especially for folks in these waterfront communities, is the FEMA special 50% rule. Okay. And so I just want to talk just generally or briefly as to how that 50% rule plays out, because virtually everybody's in this Zone A FEMA special flood zone. So can you talk about that a little bit, Jason?
You're talking about the substantial damage determination letter that you get from the flood program. I'll explain that. Depending on if your house is grandfathered in, which means it's, let's say it's a ranch house from 1947 and you have flood insurance versus a newly constructed house that might have been built 5 years ago, it'll change that up. If you have an older house that's been grandfathered in, for example, the substantial damage determination means that if your house is found by your local property appraiser's office has been damaged by flood more than 50% of its value, then you get the $30,000 under coverage A to either demolish the house, raise the house on pier and beam, or to make some type of alterations. That $30,000 comes from that with the substantial damage determination letter. Now, that doesn't represent that if you have that damage, that you've maxed out your flood claim under coverage A. No, it's based on the ability of raising it, demolishing it, or moving it. So that's one thing to keep in mind, but you have to have that from your local county or elected official with the proper authority to make that determination. It's the economic aspects of it. It's not the flood damage that we're talking about previously. So even if you have a substantial damage determination letter, you're exhausting coverage A, basically. So if you already have a total loss under coverage A and you get a substantial damage letter, and it's kind of like you don't get a double dip there. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The second thing is you make sure you get the information from the county or your city government, whoever it is that's, given that authority to make sure you get that letter, and then you submit it to FEMA or the insurance company administering the policy. And you have a certain amount of time beyond just, it's within when they issue that letter, it's usually 2 years. I think if I recall, I have to look at it, but I think it's 2 years from the date of that letter, you have to either raise it, demolish it, or move it.
Sure. Okay. And the other thing to look out for is just a 50% rule in the Florida Building Code, right? Which is, if the repairs to the structure exceed 50% of the value of the structure, not including the value of the land, all these houses are sitting on valuable land, but if the repairs exceed 50% of the value of the structure, not including the value of the land, then the home has to be brought up to current code. And in this case, where we get these low-lying properties, current code requires elevation. It basically makes it a total loss. Where the house has to be built to elevated, updated electrical, HVAC, et cetera. So I have not seen, just in my personal experience, I live out by Clearwater Beach. I have not seen the county coming out and red tagging a lot of properties. Red tagging meaning they're marking them as, substantial damage over the 50% rule. I have a great deal of concern that some of that may be forthcoming. I can tell you that, after going into these disaster zones, typically I see the county out there before they even let residents go back. And the red tagging places, I saw it down in the Keys after Hurricane Irma, certainly down in Lee County and the surrounding areas after Hurricane Ian. And I've not seen Pinellas County red tagging a lot of properties. We are seeing it some, but it's something to be aware of, because if I've got really obvious damage that really obviously exceeds 50% of the value of the dwelling, do I really want to go spend $20,000 on dry out or $30,000 on dry out if I'm only going to get $250 from flood, and then I'm going to have to knock my house down? And that's just a real issue that folks are having to deal with right now. And there's kind of some guesswork going into it because Pinellas County has not been red tagging. So, there's kind of some business decisions to be made there. But I think, ultimately getting these places dried out and mitigating the losses is the right answer. But there becomes a point where if it's so obvious that it's going to be a total loss under that 50% rule, it would be nice to get some feedback from the local municipality, whether it's the building department or otherwise, on whether they're going to be condemning this house. Because if they're going to be condemning it, you don't want to be spending good money at bad on dry out. So I know that's something that folks are dealing with right now. And if you're not sure about how to calculate the 50%, or you've got questions, again, that's something we can help with. And that information is readily available on the property appraiser's website.
Definitely.
All right. Well, we've gone about 45 minutes or so, and so I don't want to take up too much more time. Allie, if you have anything you want to add kind of in conclusion,
I had
And then,
two things to note, I guess, because I had this question earlier today. So FEMA assistance is different than what we're talking about. So if you seek assistance from FEMA to help you get like a working, I think they give you one working toilet, all that stuff, that is completely different than what you're seeking under your insurance policy. I know we keep talking about FEMA, it's just because it's the same government entity. However, these are different things. So if you seek FEMA assistance, it's totally different than what we've been talking about. The other thing, and James touched on this a little bit about, getting second opinions and stuff like that. When the insurance company provides you with their determination, whether they're denying certain areas of coverage or they're saying this is what we're going to pay you, you can question that. Like you can dispute it. You can have second opinions. That's where we can definitely reach out, ask us, send us your policy, let us take a look and say, yes, there's not coverage for your, let's say your screen enclosure, your pool or whatever. And hey, we think there's, you're like, oh, I need more money to repair this. That's, just because they say this is what it is, you don't have to just accept it. My own grandmother did that. And I was like, Grandma, call me. So just so you know, you do have the right. You want your house repaired. You want to be in your pre-loss condition. That costs, that takes time and money. So make sure that you are looking into that. And that's where we are happy to help. We are here. We can say our email and phone number multiple times again. But reach out to James, myself, Jason, our offices, and we are happy to help you.
all right, well, that sounds good. And just to follow that up, you can go to constable-law.com. Call our office 727-797-0100. And frankly, I've been getting a bunch of phone calls on my cell phone, which I don't mind one bit. I'm doing the best I can to keep up. 727-207-5852. At the end of the day, this is a challenging time. We know that, we understand that, we're living it. But it's something that everybody's going to get through it. And so it's just a matter of just following the right steps, taking the right processes and procedures. And I think we've really built that into our firm. And that's why we, really take pride in what we do in representing homeowners and commercial building owners in these types of disputes, because we've seen it. We've seen this each of us has individually seen these thousands of times. And what I think we do is we have a proven process for helping to expedite the claims process. We have a proven process for negotiating these claims and getting fair outcomes for our clients. And it's not about bullying the insurance companies. It's not about getting more than you're entitled to. It's about getting what you're entitled to under these policies as best you can. So if you're looking for assistance, looking for feedback, have friends that have questions, hopefully this webinar has been helpful. Thank you, Allie, for putting this together. And don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks.
Thank you.